Hey there, welcome to Takeaway with Sam Oches, a podcast from Nation's Restaurant News. I am Sam Oches, editor-in-chief of NRN, and this is the show where I give you an all-access pass to the restaurant industry's most influential decision-makers. Coming at you from New York City, where NRN is getting together our brand new podcast studio. Very exciting, still coming together. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can kind of see the difference behind me. That's because I'm here in the podcast studio. If you're just listening to this, just trust me, there is a podcast studio behind me. Anyway, this week I am talking with Andy Diamond, the president of Angry Crab Shack. This full-service franchise is based in Arizona and has 24 locations open, and it's growing across the U.S. and the U.K. It's a seafood boil concept where experience is everything. And Andy joined the podcast to talk about how they keep that experience fresh and exciting, plus how the efficiencies of their kitchen and their menu help them with labor and growth. In this interview, you will learn more about why your restaurant should be like a punch in the face, why the younger generations should be a critical consideration in your innovation, and why a great restaurant experience is the perfect franchise advertisement. Jumping now into my interview with Angry Crab Shack's Andy Diamond. Also, don't forget to stick around after the interview as I will share my 4 takeaways from this discussion, actionable insights that you can take with you on the go. Okay, I'm sitting down with Andy Diamond, the president of Angry Crab Shack. Andy, thanks for taking some time today.
Sam, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to it.
All right, so Andy, Angry Crab Shack, give us the pitch on what this brand is all about. What is this concept? What's the personality of this brand?
Well, I mean, it's Angry Crab Shack, but we're not all angry. Ron Liu is our founder. Basically, he thought of the name because he was in the hospital with a staph infection, and he was angry because he couldn't do anything. He was lying in bed, and so he's got a background of seafood, and he's a first-generation Chinese American. So obviously, that's where the Asian Cajun flavors come into, some of the flavoring that he had growing up. And he just thought to himself, have you ever seen a happy crab? And the name just kind of stuck with him, Angry Crab Shack. And it's sort of, a name when you first hear about it makes you curious, and it sounds exciting, and it sounds fun, and it sounds entertaining. And that's exactly what type of restaurant we are. We want our guests to come in and have an experience. They, work hard for their money. Seafood, even at great value, is still expensive. And so we want people to come in and feel like they got something more than a meal. And so from the first second they walk in, we want them to be entertained. It's an interactive, it's a fun environment. If you get something spicy or if it's a special celebration, we're going to do a shout out for you. Because you're eating with your hands, you're not on your phone. So families actually have to sit there and talk to each other and converse like before mobile phones. So everyone will, take their pictures with Instagram, to put on Instagram and TikTok and make all their videos of the food. And then you pretty much have to put it down and eat. So Ron really wanted just he kind of uses the term, like when you get punched in the face, you're going to really remember it, is sort of what he always says. And that's what we hope when you come into Angry Crab Shack, that it's a memorable experience.
And to that end, the seafood boil is kind of the concept here. Yeah. Tell me, if I'm a customer coming into Angry Crab Shack, what's that experience that I am going to get?
So most people know seafood boil. They think of Louisiana-style seafood boil, which is your traditional, it's your Old Bay, it's your Zatarans. People think of crawfish, shrimp, corn, and potatoes. It's not unlike that. But instead of a water-based sauce, we use a butter-based sauce. And instead of just Zatarans and Old Bay, we're using Cajun and lemon pepper, and we're using garlic. So again, that's where your mix of your Asian Cajun flavor. So if you were to come in, you'd get the menu, and especially if it's your first time, you would get a very good and detailed explanation from our serving staff of how you go through our menu. First, you would want to pick your seafood, and that comes from shrimp. You could get 3 different kinds of shrimp: head on, head off, and then naked shrimp, which is peeled and veined. You could get clams, you could get mussels, king crab, snow crab, lobster tails, live Dungeness crab, live lobster. So first thing you want to do is you pick your protein. Then you want to pick your sauce. So you can do any combination of Cajun, lemon pepper, garlic. We also have a Pacific Rim, which is like a coconut curry. We also have a sweet and tangy, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a sweet and tangy sauce. And you can do any combination. If you want to do all 3, Cajun, lemon pepper, and garlic, then that's our trifecta sauce is the most popular one. If you want to do lemon pepper and Cajun, that's another popular one. So you get to create your own menu. Once you create the sauce that you want, if you don't want butter and you want to be a little more healthy, you could get it in water. If you wanted to use the coconut milk, again, a little bit more healthy than butter, you can do that. So then you would pick the base. Most people do butter, obviously. And then you pick your spice level. You can go from 0, where there's no spice at all the way up to 6 or 7, which is the Carolina Reaper, and anywhere in between. And so you basically can customize your own menu. There's not a lot of places where, you go into a restaurant and you got to pick what's on their menu. We give you all our menu items and you get to pick exactly what you want and how you want to make it. If you want to do combo, something we did about 4 or 5 years ago is customization. So as you as the guest, you're like, you know what? I'm thinking I'm liking shrimp and snow crab. Okay, you want to do a pound of snow crab and a half pound of shrimp? We'll do that. Like anything that you want to add, corn, sausage, potatoes, egg, noodles, rice, whatever you want, we will make that meal specifically the way that you want it.
And then the presentation of it. I mean, when I think of a seafood boil, I think of like I've been at somewhere it's a long table and you got newspapers out and you dump it all on the table. What's the presentation of that?
So we do use butcher paper, and that is because you can dump the food out on the table that you want. And again, we don't have the long picnic tables where it's community eating and things like that, as you see at a lot of boil places. So there are individual tables you're going to be dining with, who you come to dine with. And you can eat it right out of the bag. And the reason why it's in the bag is that we want to make sure that the seafood is served warm and fresh to you. So we don't do a lot of, when you go to a restaurant, you usually order and everything gets put together in one order and then comes all at once. We make the seafood when it's ready, it comes to your table. And we try to get everything, coming out right at around the same time so nobody's waiting. Obviously, we're not perfect, but we want you to get the seafood as soon as it's cooked and as fresh as it can be. We don't use heat lamps. We don't have it sitting under anything, to sit and overcook in or anything like that. It comes right to you once it comes out of the boil pot. We are making a sort of a change now, though. And something that we wanted to do. If you look at a lot of these boil places, the Instagrams, you're seeing people with food all over the table and then sort of like a dipping sauce where they can, dip the seafood in there and before they eat it. And that's not what you get at a lot of seafood boil places because the sauce is already on the seafood. So what we are now doing, we've been experimenting with cake tins and having the food placed in a cake tin, but the server would actually come out and with the bag, place the cake tin down, pour the seafood in the cake tin, and then you would get an extra side sauce with it that you can use as a dipping sauce. So, it's one of those things when you see all the advertisements, social media, TikTok videos, Instagram, everything that you see in an advertisement. And you're like, wow, that looks really good where they're able to dip the seafood in the side sauce. And then you come into the restaurant and that's not actually what you get. We wanted to make that change to make the experience more of what you see on videos.
It's so interesting because, there's an operational component here, which is interesting, which is so much of this customization that you explained and the customer being able to sort of build that meal for themselves. How does that affect your team in the kitchen? Because I imagine operationally, in my head, it sounds like that adds some complexity, but explain the Angry Crab Shack kitchen operation and how you guys make sure that this all can be as efficient as possible.
Yeah, Sam, well, we are 11 years old and we have evolved over, the 11 years. So when we first opened, we didn't have a full menu. We didn't have hamburgers. We didn't have salads. We didn't have garlic noodles. We had less appetizers. We didn't have as chicken sandwiches or as many options such as shrimp and grits and jambalaya and sort of the things we have now. So we started off simple. Seafood boil, and po' boys in baskets, and then some appetizers. And then as we've got along and our kitchen got used to things, we saw where we could make some changes in customization. The other reason, obviously, as you get older, more and more seafood boil places started popping up. And, this is where they say competition is good. It's really good. It forces you to be better. It forced us to say, you know what, our guests would like customization. Let's find a way to do that. So a lot of it is we're adding some things in, but we make sure that we experiment. We make sure that we have proper training. We make sure that we've answered every single question before we put it into operation. We'll do it ourselves before we roll it out to our franchisees in Arizona or in other states. So we make sure that there is a system, and we will not try to rush anything, because we want to make sure when we finally roll it out, any new procedure, that all questions are answered. We learn from our own mistakes, and things can go off, without any flaws, or as few flaws as possible. But in doing that, once you get used to cooking seafood boil and you realize how quick it is, it's not like a steak. When you go to a steakhouse, you're waiting 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes, depending on how well done you want the steak. You can cook shrimp in a minute. And with the way that our kitchen is set up, you could do roughly 25 to 30 orders at one time. Because you don't need the grill space. We don't have huge ovens. We have stock pots or burners for the boil. We have a flat top grill, and we have fryers. And that's about the extent of it. So we do not have a saute station. And as I already mentioned, because the food comes out when it's ready, you don't need an expo. So you don't need that extra space to keep all the orders together. And usually when you have more space for food, or for really anything in any business that you're in, the more space that you have and the more food or product that you have in that space, the more likelihood there's going to be a mistake. So that really helps a lot, where we're not redoing a lot of orders. We're not making a lot of mistakes. So we're not being inefficient in the kitchen trying to do something twice, or 3 times because we did something wrong the first time.
So it actually sounds like it limits the complexities here too, because it seems like if it's made to order, basically employees just chucking everything into the boil that they have on the customer's ticket, right?
It is. And I mean, it's about repetition. So before, the hardest thing really was portioning, because before we did the add to the bags where guests could customize their own boil, everything was a pound. So it was an easy prep. Everything was being done as a pound. Then when we started allowing guests to order half pounds of clams, excuse me, half pounds of crawfish, half pounds of shrimp, we started to portion, the seafood in half pounds. So once our prep team got used to that, and once our boil team, got used to, throwing in half pounds and thing of that nature, it just became second nature, because you're still using the same bag. You can put 2 or 3 pounds of seafood in one bag. So it's not like because we were adding crawfish or shrimp or clams to a pound of snow crab that it was a completely second order. It was just combining the order into one bag. So there was a lot less complication to it. This new procedure where we're doing the plating, it's a little bit different because it affects our servers too. Because before they just used to bring the bag out and put it on the table. Now they're actually putting it into the cake tin. They're bringing a side sauce. So we have to make sure that the side sauces that are made go with the proper order. And so that's taking a little bit more time, but we just opened a location last Thursday in Prescott. And we had Prescott, Arizona, which is about 2 hours north of Phoenix. And because we had been working on this so much, we actually introduced this new plating procedure at their grand opening. And we had a kitchen staff and a front of the house staff that had done 2 weeks of training, and they had no problem, rolling out this new procedure. One, because this is the only thing they had ever known at Angry Crab Shack. So they hadn't known how we had done it previously. But when we were able to see new employees roll this out, that gives us confidence that our training was correct and that we'll be able to roll this out company-wide.
So the labor component of this then, I mean, obviously the last few years have been pretty tough on labor.
Yes.
Do you find that it's loosening up a little bit? Are you finding that it's easier now to recruit some employees and this sort of training and recruitment element here? I guess, what is your strategy for ensuring you have the best employees to be able to facilitate that kind of experience?
I mean, the labor market's definitely switched. And I think restaurants and hospitality probably got hurt the most by the pandemic, because you saw a lot of workers in hospitality basically say to themselves, if I'm ever going to get out of hospitality, whether it's hotels, whether it's restaurants, no matter what it is, now's the time to do it. With stimulus checks and, with the extra unemployment, and with the transition of a lot of people obviously buying more online, a lot of people switched industries, and not a lot of people have come back to the restaurant industry since COVID. And when we first opened, we had a lot of high school kids. High school kids worked in restaurants. That's kind of how it was. When I grew up, it was restaurants or supermarkets. It's basically, where you're working. And that's just really not how it is anymore. So we're getting a little bit older employees, a little bit more mature employees. If they're not in school, their ability to work longer hours or different hours, kind of opens them up to more availability because they're not in school. So that's helped out a little bit. We did not need as many employees as we did before because we weren't working where, kids couldn't work during the day or kids could only work during weekends. But it's a fairly easy concept, and the kitchen operations are easy as well, that even if you had never worked in a kitchen before, you could come into an Angry Crab Shack and we could train you. It's not like these extensive menus that you would see like with Cheesecake Factory, which is just a huge menu and a lot of positions and you need a lot of labor. That's not what's really needed at our locations. On busy nights, we can run with, 8 cooks, a dishwasher, and a prep person. And, that's sometimes what kitchens need for a non-busy night, just because of just the number of positions that are needed in a kitchen.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an efficient model that I imagine is going to help you scale, which I want to talk about here in a second. But before I do, I'm curious about the experiential component a little bit more too, because I will compare you to another brand that's growing today. Maybe you've heard of, called K-Pot, and K-Pot is doing Korean hot pot and Korean barbecue. Kind of came out of nowhere. I hadn't really heard of this brand, and they went from like 3 to 55 locations in a couple of years. And I bring them up mostly because, it's sort of a similar thing where it's sort of pick your protein, pick your ingredients. Then there's a little bit of a DIY component where you're kind of doing this at the table. And the reason why I bring this up is because I'm struck that that customers are interested in this more of an adventure at the table, more of an experience, particularly in full service restaurants, and that those are the brands that seem to be getting a lot of attention and growing today. Does that resonate with you? Do you feel like this experiential component, do you feel like that's an important part of Angry Crab Shack's growth?
Absolutely. And I'm familiar with K-Pot. We saw them a couple of years ago. We go to a multi-unit franchise convention in Las Vegas, and that's where we first saw them. And they've actually opened up a couple of locations here in Arizona, not one far from us. So we can kind of get it, kind of feel of it. But you're absolutely right about, especially the younger generation, wanting to be more foodies and adventurous. And I mean, this is social media. And, I mentioned where a lot of guests come in, they'll take pictures or videos of the food, and then they'll start eating. That's just sort of how it is now with a camera in your hand. Everyone likes to take pictures of where they are, what they're eating, their experience about it. You see influencers, foodies, and I mean, everyone's a foodie now. Even if they're not a foodie, they're a foodie. And so I think this is where it's fairly important, really, in any business that you're in, is that you always are looking to increase your customer base and always looking at the younger generation. The younger generations are absolutely more adventurous with their food choices. And that comes a lot, not so much a K-Pot does where they're doing it yourself or where we're asking our guests, hey, build the boil the way that you want it, but it's your sauces and your menu items. So we look to bring new exciting sauces or things that we can do to really spice up the seafood. That might be something that the younger generation, is looking for. And as an example, we're rolling out a new lunch menu, and we came up with a brisket sandwich. But our brisket sandwich is going to have gochujang, which is a Korean spice that you usually see with marinated Korean beef. And we're infusing coleslaw with the gochujang sauce to put on a brisket sandwich with a cucumber. So taking a regular brisket sandwich and then doing something that gives it a little bit different taste, a little bit different flavor. I think that's what brands, need to do. come up with new sauces. We're doing a limited time offering. And usually when we do a limited time offering, you're focusing on an actual product that you're trying to sell. You're like a certain menu item. What we're doing, one that's coming up, we're coming up with they're called spicy sauces now. They're sweet and they're spicy, not unlike our sweet and tangy, which we've had on our menu for years. But this is more like you see the hot honeys and things like that. So we'll do a limited time offering with this spicy sauce on many different items. So the limited offering is actually the sauce, not necessarily a sandwich that you may be able to use on a bunch of different items. I think brands need to do that. But restaurants and businesses in general always need to make sure they're taking care of their loyal guests that they've had for years, while also introducing your food to the younger generation. Because in 10 years, those 35 to 45-year-olds that were coming in frequently are a little bit older. So they're coming in early dinners. They may not be coming in as much. And those 15-year-olds are now 25, and the 25-year-olds are now 35. So you need to make sure that you're still getting that guest cycle. So every year, every 5 to 10 years, every generation, brands, restaurants especially, need to make sure they're targeting their younger generations so you can continue the growth of your business and not sort of fall off a ledge if you quit trying to, really focus on that younger demographic.
It's so interesting. I have a couple of things you just talked about there. The influencer piece of this, everything being so visual and people having their phones. And then that Swicy comment, because it's so interesting. I think Swicy was something that really popped on social media, right? Where it became very much a trendy thing on social and was going viral. And it's just so funny because when you think about it, I mean, the pressure on restaurants today to keep up with the zeitgeist, keep up with what's trending on social media, to incorporate that into their innovation. I'm wondering, for Angry Crab Shack, which, the seafood boil, there's something very traditional about seafood boil. Obviously the Cajun seafood boil, it's sort of rooted in, historical experiences. As you guys innovate around some of these things, and as you make sure you're trying to capture that younger generation and get them taking pictures and posting to social, how do you balance that, sort of keeping it authentic, respecting the tradition of the seafood boil, but also incorporating some of those trends?
Yeah, well, one way is we have traditional boil on the menu. So if you want to come in and you're from Louisiana and you really are saying, well, I like my crawfish, just a traditional style, we have that. We've got a traditional boil base, and it's water based, and it basically would be the same as if you were getting it in Louisiana or that type of traditional boil. And so we have that available for guests. The great thing about seafood is that its popularity is soaring. It's more healthier, which is something that the younger generation and older generation, now as they get older, want to get away from red meat. So seafood is becoming more and more part of people's everyday diet. But when that's your base, and when seafood's your base, and when your business is saucing and spicing in different ways, you can keep refreshing your brand and adding to your brand without really changing your brand, because our brand's always going to be seafood boil. How that seafood is sauced and spiced and presented, all those things can change without really changing who you've always been. And that's just really one of the great advantages of Angry Crab Shack, and how Angry Crab Shack can really look at Korean restaurants and Chinese restaurants and Ethiopian restaurants and all different restaurants of all different cultures, and see the kind of sauces and spices that are becoming popular, and can incorporate those sauces and spices into our seafood. And so it's really a brand that can really adjust on the fly, that can almost be a chameleon to any demographic. If you like spicy food, you're going to enjoy Angry Crab Shack. If you like Cajun food, you're going to enjoy Angry Crab Shack. If you just like seafood, if you're from the East Coast and just want a live lobster with butter, you will like Angry Crab Shack. So we really appeal to all types of demographics.
Okay, so I mentioned scaling before. You guys is it 24 locations open today?
Yeah, so 24 location, our 24th one just opened, the one in Prescott. It's 23 in the U.S. with one over in the United Kingdom. They're planning to open their second location just north of Borough Market in October of this year. And then they have a third location plan that they're about ready to sign a lease on over by Victoria Station that will open in the first quarter. And again, we're working with them right now on them purchasing the territory, whether it be London or the entire UK, where this group would become the master franchisee and they would be responsible for growing the market, which it makes it a lot easier when, it's in a completely different country, that another group that lives in that country and is obviously it's easier for them to get franchisees and grow that territory.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, international growth. I've talked to a few other people recently about this. It feels like we're getting some momentum for some international expansion again. Of course, for obvious reasons during COVID, it was like that was kind of came to a standstill. Now it seems like there's so much activity in the States and certainly so many saturated markets, and that depending on your brand, international expansion actually does make a lot of sense for some groups. But the UK, it's so interesting. I mean, I feel like when I'm talking international expansion with folks, people are talking about the Middle East or, some other region, maybe Southeast Asia. UK, where did that come from? How did that opportunity get in front of you? And were you guys always thinking about international expansion?
It's always a thought that it could happen. The places that first came up obviously were Canada and Mexico. Being both in North America and being in Arizona, we wouldn't be that far from Mexico. But we had this group from London, and they saw us on social media. And there were a couple seafood boil places that had opened up there, and this group really liked it and thought it could be, a very popular trend in London that really hasn't hit yet, like it has here in the U.S. And because of that, they wanted a franchise. They wanted someone that already had the menu, already had the marketing. It was just, we want to take your business plan and then use it in our territory. So, and that's basically what franchisees are. They buy risk. They're averting risk by buying a proven model. And this group flew over in the end of 2022, beginning into 2022, I believe, and went to about 8 of our restaurants. And they had the same meal. Everything was consistent. They saw the locations consistent. The service was consistent. The food was consistent. And they had a great time every visit. So they contacted us and became interested. And then we treated them just like any franchisee. They came in for a discovery day, asked the questions that they needed to ask. Decided to move forward with a 3-store agreement. And, they came over here for training for about 5 weeks, which is what our franchise training is. And then we went over to London for the grand opening for 2 weeks. That's how long we send our team over for grand openings, is 2 weeks, 1 week of training, and then 1 week there for the first full week that any location is open. So it happened because we were, we were who we are, or we are who we were, however you want to say it. And that's the best advertisement that any brand can do, is when people walk into your 4 walls and have a great experience. That's going to do a lot more than someone seeing a social media post or, an advertisement, for a franchise. Actually going to the restaurant and experiencing it is the best advertising that a brand can do. But you're right about international expansion. We've looked at the Gulf states, Qatar, and obviously Dubai and Kuwait City and areas like that. We've looked at Singapore. Obviously the UK, London is a big foodie city. And with growth there, I think we could get some interest from places like Spain and Portugal. I think we could get interest in countries like Morocco and Africa. I think we could get interest in, Central America or South America. And again, when you think of the spice and when you think of the seafood, I mean, it really, this brand would work internationally a lot easier, because a lot of the spices and seafood are international delicacies already. Just maybe not just the style of seafood boil.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I was going to say that. I mean, it just feels like, because of course, if you really trace the roots of the seafood boil, if you go to, Cajun, but of course, a lot of that's rooted in African,
Yes.
and seafood being such a globally consumed protein, it seems like you guys must check a lot of boxes for a lot of cultures around the world. So do you feel like, are you guys going to pursue that aggressively and proactively, or wait for these groups to come to you?
So I think it's going to be a mixture of both. And one thing that we do like about it, no matter where you are, seafood is readily available. So if you're, if you're in London, the snow crab that they get is Norwegian snow crab, where we get Canadian or Alaskan here in the United States. Shrimp is in all type of waters, no matter where you are. So it's not like when you expand internationally, the seafood is going to be hard to get. The toughest thing is really the spices, and in some countries, maybe the butter. We looked at, we had some interest in China at one point, and the biggest issue we sort of had there was getting the butter over to China and how we were going to, accomplish that. So there's always going to be some issues that you have to work through, some logistics that you have to work through. But with seafood being so popular and with spices and heats being so popular, I think we should be smart about it. So one of the biggest international franchise conventions is in Paris. I see us going to that convention in a year or two as we grow in London, because we'll have some international presence. And from being in London and then going to Paris, I think then we'll get an idea of how aggressive we want to be internationally. We've taken some shots. We've gotten with some brokers who actually represent some advertising with us in Singapore and in like Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. And we haven't gotten any, interest so far, but we have taken some international sort of shots like that just to see almost like sort of like a litmus test or testing out sort of how aggressive that we want to be. But I think as London expands and we expand in the UK, I think we'll get more aggressive in our international expansion.
Well, then tell me about your domestic expansion and franchising here. I imagine there must be a lot of demand considering this is a pretty distinct concept.
Yeah. So when we opened in 2013, there were a few other seafood boils. Everyone knew Hot and Juicy. Everyone knew Boil and Crab. They were, ones before us that Boil and Crab's mostly in California. Hot and Juicy has expanded sort of to other states. But since we've opened, I would say we started seeing 2015, 2016, a really big expansion of seafood boil concepts. A lot of them coming to Angry Crab Shack in Arizona, because Arizona is a place where a lot of individuals come to vacation. Whether it's sporting events, you got spring training. Obviously, you've got great weather, March, April, and snowbirds come in the winter. Families come and visit, their grandparents that are snowbirds here in Arizona. So we started seeing more expansion. And actually, when some of these places expanded, and we read about them, they had mentioned that they had visited Angry Crab Shack in Arizona, which is where they got the idea. So I think you're going to start seeing in each portion sort of territory in the country, I think you're going to start seeing brands sort of pop up. We're willing to go to anywhere we've gone. We're in Henderson, Nevada, which is just right outside of Las Vegas. We're in Everett, Washington, which is 45 minutes outside Seattle. We're in Atlanta, Georgia. We're in Orange Beach, Alabama. We're in Atascocita, Texas, which is not far from Houston. So we've sort of laid the groundwork in different markets, everywhere really except sort of the Midwest, which is weird because that's where I'm from in Kansas City. Would love to go back to Kansas City and bring an Angry Crab Shack to it. So I think you'll start seeing more and more pockets of these seafood boil restaurants come out. And again, that's where competition is good, because if you look at these, Angry Crab Shack has the most diverse menu. Angry Crab Shack has the customization that you can get with basically creating your own seafood boil. We have some seafood boils, some of the bigger combinations that are suggestions to them, but a lot of places already you have to get a like seafood boil combination this specific way, no substitutions. We are not like that. We allow our guests to customize everything, customize the boil any way that they want. So I think we have a leg up on our competition. I think our sauces and spices are more bold and more flavorful than our competition. So for us in expansion, it is just going to be about really advertising, getting the word out, getting the guests in, because once we know that the guests come into Angry Crab Shack, we know they're going to come back for more.
So, thinking about the seafood part of this, I'm curious about supply chain and sourcing because you guys are all over the country. I mean, all those cities you were naming, you're really far flung. Of course, globally, then that's a whole other ball game. What does the supply chain look like? How? Because also, I imagine you sell just a lot of seafood because you're built around not just seafood, but kind of seafood at volume. So does that look like? Are there challenges you guys are trying to overcome considering that this is your core ingredient?
Yeah, so I mean, it's another reason to become a sub franchisee or vendor or franchisee or vendor relationships. So every franchisee receives the same pricing model that we do, no matter where they are. So they're going to be able to buy their products cheaper than they would if they were just out on their own or what's called a street account. We've been partnering with Cisco now since 2015, 2016. They purchase the main seafood items, shrimp, snow crab, and king crab. They purchase for us in bulk to make sure that we always have supply, and we're always out making purchases before we run out. So basically, when a container of shrimp gets to Cisco for distribution, it lasts 3 or 4 months. We're already purchasing another container ready to come in, so there's no delay. And again, with seafood, lobster, uh, it's coming for us. We're getting it delivered from, Maine, Boston waters. We're getting our Dungeness crab from Portland. So uh, anywhere in the United States, you can get that shipped. The price of it will depend on how far you're shipping. Obviously, Atlanta will get lobsters cheaper than we do because we're shipping it further, across the nation. But in London, it's a little bit different. The lobsters they're getting are about a pound, pound and a half. Where here in America, a lot of people like the lobsters 2 pounds and more. So when you do expand internationally, you do have to pay attention to certain eating habits, in that country. Obviously, we like things large, supersized here. In other countries, that's not necessarily the same. So being able to supply all our franchisees definitely is one of the things we work at mostly. The last thing we want is no product to be available. But because of the deals that we've worked out, we've been able to eliminate that for the most part. You're always going to have some issues. I mean, seafood is a commodity. We saw during COVID king crab and snow crab spike up as high as we've ever seen it. We've seen that price come down and now it's starting to go back up a little. So you just have to make sure when you're doing the menu, as you've seen boil places, you'll see the seafood at market price. And that market price could always change. Now, we never want to do sticker shock. We never want a guest come in and say, a week ago, this was $30 a pound. Now you're telling me it's $40 a pound. So it's you have to be strategic with your menu. One thing that we do is we look at what we think the pricing of the seafood is going to be 6 months from now, and we'll have our pricing based on what that price is going to be or what that cost is. So we've already planned for it. We only change our market pricing maybe once a year. So guests never have to wonder what's the seafood going to be like today. We're already strategically looking at it. We also have sort of a ceiling as high as we want to go, where we're like king crab's a big one. That when that price goes up, we may be like, you know what, we don't want to charge more than $60 a pound at our Arizona locations. Even if king crab goes to $40 a pound, that's a horrible food cost. We don't want to do that. So we will provide that value, but then we'll also look at maybe some of our other menu items to strategically change the pricing on that will sort of make up to make sure that our menu is still, cost effective for our franchisees. So you have to sort of play a dual role, when you're really talking about pricing your seafood and doing a menu, is you want to make sure you're providing value. You're not doing sticker shock, but you're also not hanging your franchisees out to dry with a menu that is not profitable.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. All right, Andy, last question for you. Before we hit record, you were talking about how excited you are about some of the charities that Angry Crab Shack is
Yeah.
participating in. Tell me a little bit about some of those relationships and how that's a part of this brand and what it's all about.
Yeah. So one of our founding principles or core principles of Angry Crab Shack has always been giving back to the community, becoming part of the community. It started out when we were one store. We'd make donations to food banks. We'd obviously support local high schools. If there unfortunately was a fallen officer or firefighter, we would make a donation, to first responders, to that firefighters fund or police fund. And we make sure every grand opening we have a hot wing eating contest, and it's always police versus fire. And the winning team gets a donation. The losing team also gets the donation. But that's sort of just how we are. But our two biggest partners, one, we do something for veterans. And in July, we do a annual campaign. It's called You Dine, We Donate. And for every guest that comes into Angry Crab Shack, we will donate 25 cents to Arizona Housing Coalition, which helps at-risk veterans, not just with housing, but with getting a driver's license, getting clothes, dentist appointment, medical appointment, filling out Social Security, anything that, we can do to help protect the veterans that protected us, overseas or at home. We want to do as much as we can for them. And we usually raise anywhere between $75,000 and $100,000 a year. Since 2017, after this year's donation, it looks like we'll have roughly a little over $450,000 donated since 2017 to Arizona Housing Coalition. And that's something that every Angry Crab Shack, no matter where they are, will participate in. And the second partner that we have is Phoenix Children's Hospital. And if you're an out-of-state franchise, you find a children's hospital that's sort of in the same network. I believe in Vegas, it's Sunrise Hospital. But what we have on our menu, a very popular item, are Cajun fries. We've renamed them on our menu Phoenix Children's Fries. So for every Phoenix Children's fry that is bought, we will donate $1 to Phoenix Children's Hospital. And we've been donating them since 2018. And by the end of this year, we'll be at $1.4 million in donations to Phoenix Children's Hospital. So those are two very near and dear partnerships that we have. We've also started a partnership with Arizona Diabetes Association. We also do things, I said, for first responders, and really donate to food banks anywhere in the community where we feel like we can help. We want to.
That's amazing. I love that. Thank you for doing all that. That's important work. Andy Diamond of Angry Crab Shack. Really appreciate your time, Andy. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Ask anytime. I'll come back.
That was my interview with Angry Crab Shack's Andy Diamond. So what should you learn from this interview? Here are my 4 takeaways. My first takeaway is that your restaurant should be like a punch in the face. And no, that doesn't mean that it should be painful, but that it should be memorable. I like how Andy described this. You don't forget getting punched in the face. And that's how he wants Angry Crab Shack to be. The team there wants you to leave the restaurant with a memorable experience that's never going to leave you. Because obviously, if they can do that, then you're going to come back more and more to have that experience again and again. You're going to make that restaurant be a part of your regular consideration set. So no, don't make your restaurant a punch in the face. Painfully, make it a punch in the face of memory, of experience. Make it be something that is such a distinct experience that you will not forget it. My second takeaway is that younger generations should be a critical consideration in your innovation. Of course, we all get kind of sick when the next generation comes up of, the millennials this, millennials that, or Gen Z this and Gen Z that. But there's good reason to pay attention to what the younger generations want, particularly in their restaurant experiences. They are going to grow up into the primary decision makers for their households. Not only are they spending money now, Gen Z especially has discretionary income and are making those decisions, but over the next 10 to 20 years, they're going to be ever more important in deciding where their dollars go. And they're going to eventually, potentially have families, and they're deciding where their families go to eat. Andy pointed that out, that he made this great point of, you've got to think about 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, and the young generations today being your loyal guests of tomorrow. As such, as you innovate on your menu and your marketing, whatever you're doing, think about what the younger generations are wanting. Andy used the example of sauces and how their Angry Crab Shack is making the menu items more customizable, and they're playing around with some sauces and some LTOs to empower those Gen Z guests who want that. They want flavor adventure, they want different sauces, and they want customization. And so that innovation is really centered around those younger generation. Another great example is when we talked about that spicy trend, spicy and sweet. That's been everywhere on social media, TikTok, Instagram. And if you notice that on Instagram and TikTok, then you've got to play around with those flavors. You've got to try something. You have to innovate. Because if Gen Z is going wild for spicy flavors on TikTok, well, by golly, you've got to put spicy menus on your menu, or at least try it. See what happens. You don't have to totally bend over backward for younger generations, because let's face it, depending on your concept, maybe it's not your core demographic, but someday they will be. And if you're not already creating items that get them excited and an experience that gets them excited, then you're losing them potentially for a lifetime. My third takeaway is that a great restaurant experience is the perfect franchise advertisement. So Angry Crab Shack is franchising across the U.S., and now they're going international. They've opened in England. They've got a franchise group there in the U.K. that's growing. They're interested in potentially more international expansion, but certainly domestic as well. And look, when you franchise a concept, you want to get the word out to potential franchisees. So you advertise, you go to trade shows, you do all of the things that gets in front of people who are looking for a franchise. But at the end of the day, if a potential franchisee walks into your restaurant and has an experience that, again, is like a punch in the face, that is the best advertisement. Now, you never know when these potential franchisees are walking in, but treat every guest like a potential franchisee. Have every experience for every guest that walks in be that punch in the face, be that memorable experience, because then you never know. If somebody walks in, they're interested in franchising, they've never heard of your concept, well, maybe they're going to walk out with some materials on how they could become a franchisee, or maybe they're going to go Google, find out, how do I become a franchisee for this concept? Your best advertisement for franchise expansion with potential franchisees is a great restaurant experience. My fourth and final takeaway is that international growth is heating up. Angry Crab Shack, it was a little bit fortuitous what happened with them, where this group out of the UK discovered their concept, was interested in franchising, and it worked out. But now Andy says, they're looking at more international expansion. And we talked about growth around the globe. And I just have this feeling, because Andy's not the first person I've talked to who has expressed interest in growing globally and suggested that this is really ramping up now. And I suspect post-pandemic, I think we're getting to a point now where, of course, we had this couple of years where international borders were closed and you couldn't really think very globally. Everybody had to think very locally. Now, of course, that's all in the past. And I think as we think more globally, and certainly as the U.S. goes through economic challenges, there might be more opportunity further abroad. So if your concept is either you've tapped out domestically, or you just think it has bigger potential overseas, or you just want to kick some tires and see what could happen, consider that now may be a good time. International franchising seems to be heating up, so you may want to explore that and see how that could be a fit for your own concept. Those are all my takeaways for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe to Takeaway wherever you listen to podcasts and leave your feedback. You can also email me at sam.oches@informa.com. Thanks again, and talk to you next week.